July 2008, 1944. Morning breaks over Sarum Island in the Dutch East Indies, and the sky already feels hostile. Colonel Charles MacDonald guides his formation of P-38 Lightnings through dangerous airspace. Every pilot watching fuel gauges sink closer to the red. These missions are never just about enemy aircraft. They are races against empty tanks. Flying beside MacDonald is a man who technically should not even be here. Charles Lindbergh, 42 years old. Officially listed as a civilian observer, unofficially flying combat missions that stretch the limits of both aircraft and doctrine. Everyone knows it. No one says it out loud. At 9:47 a.m., MacDonald's radio snaps alive. 7 Japanese aircraft dive from the clouds, escorting a Ki-51 Sonya bomber skimming low over the sea. According to every tactical manual, this is where American fighters should disengage. At sea level, Japanese aircraft hold the advantage, and the P-38 is supposed to be slow, heavy, and fuel-starved after such a long flight. But something happens that should not be possible. Lindbergh pushes his throttles forward. His Lightning accelerates like it has shed its weight. The distance between predator and prey collapses in seconds. The Sonya pilot looks back and sees an American fighter doing what physics says it cannot. 3 seconds later, Lindbergh fires. The bomber shatters and vanishes into the jungle below. What the Japanese pilot never knew is that Lindbergh had been flying in open defiance of Fifth Air Force manuals. He was running his engines at settings engineers swore would destroy them. Lower RPM, higher manifold pressure, ultralean mixture. A combination so controversial that mechanics had once threatened to ground any pilot who tried it. Yet Lindbergh does not just survive the fight. He still has fuel to spare. Enough to fly home comfortably. His numbers do not bend the rules. They annihilate them. This moment exposes a crisis that has been killing American pilots without a single enemy bullet. By mid-1944, the Pacific War is strangled by distance. The P-38 Lightning is powerful but thirsty, its Allison engines devouring fuel at standard cruise settings. With a combat radius of roughly 570 miles, entire regions of the Pacific remain unreachable. From New Guinea to the Philippines, targets sit hundreds of miles beyond what the aircraft can safely reach. Pilots ditch in the ocean not because they lose dogfights, but because they simply run out of gas. In May alone, 17 P-38s vanish into the sea for that reason. MacDonald reads casualty reports, knowing his fighters could have stopped enemy attacks. If only they had 50 more miles of range. Engineers insist the limits are absolute. Manuals declare the physics non-negotiable. The Lightning cannot go farther. And then Lindbergh proves, in the middle of combat, that everyone might be wrong. What happens next will pit one man's forbidden idea against the full authority of military engineering, and the war itself hangs in the balance. Inside the operations tents of the 5th Air Force, Lindbergh's combat report lands like a dropped wrench. Fuel consumption numbers that should be impossible sit neatly typed on the page. Pilots crowd around MacDonald, asking the same question in different voices. How did you still have fuel left? The answer sounds like sabotage to trained ears. Lindbergh explains calmly that the engines were never meant to scream at high RPM for hours. Power comes from pressure, not noise. By lowering engine speed and increasing manifold pressure while leaning the mixture far beyond approved limits, the P-38 stops wasting fuel and starts flying smarter. To most engineers, this is mechanical blasphemy. Manuals warn that running lean at high pressure will cause detonation, burned pistons, engine seizure, and catastrophic failure. These warnings are not theoretical. They are stamped with authority, backed by factory testing, and reinforced by years of conservative aviation doctrine. The Lightning is already considered temperamental. Its twin engines have a reputation for sudden failure. The last thing anyone wants is a civilian telling combat pilots to ignore the book. Yet the evidence refuses to stay quiet. Lindbergh flies again and again. Each time, his lightning returns with fuel margins that other pilots can only dream about. He escorts bombers deeper into enemy territory, stays longer over targets, and still lands without sweating the gauges. His engines do not explode. They run smoother, cooler, healthier. The math begins to speak louder than the rules. McDonald decides to test it himself. He copies Lindbergh's settings exactly, expecting at any moment to hear a cough, a knock, the sound of disaster. Instead, his fuel flow drops dramatically. His range expands in real time. The Pacific suddenly feels smaller. Other pilots follow, carefully at first. Then, with growing confidence, word spreads quietly across squadrons like a forbidden prayer. Command cannot ignore this forever. If Lindbergh is wrong, dozens of fighters will fall out of the sky. If he is right, the entire Pacific Air War changes overnight. Engineers are furious. They accuse Lindbergh of reckless experimentation, of survivorship bias, of gambling with lives. Lindbergh answers with data, charts, flight logs, engine temperatures, fuel burn curves. He does not argue emotionally. He lets the numbers dismantle the fear piece by piece. The real shock comes when maintenance crews inspect the engines. Instead of damage, they find reduced wear, lower stress, cleaner combustion. The very procedures meant to protect the engines had been quietly hurting them all along. The manuals were written to protect inexperienced pilots and factory warranties, not to win a war stretched across oceans. By late summer 1944, the unthinkable happens. Lindbergh's techniques are formally adopted. The P-38's effective range jumps by nearly 50%. Missions once labeled impossible are now routine. Enemy targets thought safely out of reach are suddenly exposed. But this technical revolution is only the beginning, because with greater range comes greater risk, deeper strikes, and a confrontation that will test whether this new advantage can truly change the course of the war. The first missions flown under the new engine procedures feel unreal. Pilots lift off expecting the usual anxiety, that constant mental arithmetic of fuel versus distance. Instead, the gauges fall slowly, almost politely. The Pacific, once a vast enemy in itself, begins to lose its power. Airfields that were previously just dots on a map become reachable, then targetable, then vulnerable. Japanese planners had relied on geography as armor. Now that armor is cracking. Long-range escort missions transform overnight. Bombers no longer turn back at the edge of friendly fighter cover. P-38s stay with them deep into hostile airspace, pushing past defensive rings that had never before faced sustained fighter presence. Japanese interceptors arrive, expecting the usual brief engagement window, only to find American fighters still circling, still hunting, still fully capable of combat. The psychological impact is immediate. Enemy pilots report American fighters that refuse to leave. Behind the scenes, 5th Air Force Command tracks the results with growing disbelief. Losses drop. Mission success rates climb. Fuel ditchings become rare. The Lightning, once criticized as fragile and limited, earns a new reputation as a long-range predator. None of this required a new aircraft. No redesign. No new engine. Just a willingness to challenge assumptions that had calcified into dogma. But success invites scrutiny. Higher headquarters begins asking uncomfortable questions. Why did it take a civilian to uncover this? Why were the manuals wrong? Engineers push back, arguing that Lindbergh's techniques are safe only in experienced hands. They fear widespread adoption could lead to disaster if poorly trained pilots mismanage mixtures or pressures. Commanders counter that war does not wait for perfect conditions. The choice is stark: adapt or keep losing men to empty fuel tanks. Meanwhile, Lindbergh continues flying, despite official discomfort with his presence in combat. He does not seek credit. He focuses on refining the technique, teaching pilots how to listen to their engines, how to read subtle cues instead of blindly trusting checklists. Flying becomes less mechanical and more intuitive. Pilots stop treating engines as fragile glass and start treating them as systems meant to work efficiently. The Japanese response is slow and uneven. Air defenses shift, but range is not something they can fix quickly. Airfields are relocated deeper inland. Supply lines stretch thinner. Every mile gained by American fighters forces costly adjustments on the ground. What began as a fuel-saving trick now ripples through the entire enemy war effort. Yet this advantage carries a hidden cost. Longer missions mean deeper penetration, heavier resistance, and higher stakes. Pilots are flying farther from rescue, farther from friendly forces, trusting an idea that still lives on the edge of accepted science. One mistake, one misjudgment, and the ocean waits patiently below. The question now is no longer whether Lindbergh's heresy works. It is whether its success will demand a price that no one is prepared to pay. Part 4. The Legacy. Written in the sky by early 1945, the Pacific Air War looks nothing like it did a year earlier. The Lightning's expanded range reshaped strategy maps across command rooms. Islands once considered stepping stones become launching pads. Enemy installations that lived comfortably beyond American reach are struck repeatedly, forcing Japan into a defensive crouch it cannot escape. What started as an experimental engine setting has become an operational advantage measured in destroyed airfields, disrupted supply routes, and saved American lives. Yet Lindbergh's name remains strangely absent from official headlines. His past, his civilian status, and political sensitivities keep him in the background. Credit disperses into committees, reports, and revised manuals. The war machine absorbs the innovation and moves on. Lindbergh seems content with that. His reward is not recognition, but impact. Pilots come home who would have otherwise vanished into open water. Bombers reach targets that shorten the war by weeks, maybe months. After the war, engineers quietly rewrite doctrine. Training manuals adopt fuel management philosophies that would have been unthinkable before. 1944. Aviation shifts toward efficiency, endurance, and systems thinking. The lesson lingers well beyond the P-38. Aircraft designers begin treating range as a design priority rather than an unavoidable limitation. The idea that rules can be questioned, tested, and improved becomes part of aviation culture, but history nearly forgets how fragile that transformation was. Had Lindbergh's first engine seized, had one early adopter crashed, the idea would have been buried under the word unsafe. The Pacific would have remained vast. More pilots would have died without ever seeing an enemy. Progress balanced on a knife edge, saved by data, discipline, and the courage to defy instructions written for a safer world today. This story is less about engines and more about mindset. Wars are not only won by new weapons, but by new ways of thinking about the ones already in hand. Lindbergh's quiet rebellion reminds us that innovation often arrives disguised as disobedience, and that survival sometimes depends on questioning the rules meant to protect us. And the unsettling truth is this: somewhere, right now, there are limits everyone accepts as absolute. Ranges, rules, assumptions written in modern manuals, just waiting for someone brave enough to prove they are wrong. If this story changed the way you see innovation, courage, and the hidden forces that shape history, make sure to subscribe now. Like this video to support deep research storytelling that goes beyond the surface and uncovers the moments that quietly changed the world. Share this with someone who believes limits are meant to be questioned. And comment below with your thoughts on the untold innovations that decide wars long before history writes their final chapter.